Thank you, Brooke.
Yes, of course. I'm going to make you the host now, too.
Okay, I need to make Christian the host as well. Chris, are you on?
Okay, Stacy, I have you as the host and Christian as co-host.
Okay.
Hello?
Hi, are you on there?
Okay, yeah.
She has me as the host and you as the co-host. Attendees. We've got some attendees on. I do not see Dan on here yet.
Hello.
Hi, Dan.
Let me get my video started here.
Great.
Hello.
I just promoted you to a panelist.
It says you disabled my video.
Oh, did I?
Yeah, I must have. I just can't. When I click on it, it says that you disabled my video. So
Okay, hang on.
did you get this open, Kate? Okay.
I don't know. Christian, how do I do that?
So you have to go back to the settings. Where the settings here?
You want it like here.
Video settings.
Yeah, just so we have room to like show that, then we'll
That's probably gonna fall right through.
we'll stand or sit. We can move this back.
Here, you borrow that. Oh,
Can you change him, Christian?
Oh, I can see you now.
Yeah, but I can't get to your video.
I
So
don't
it's a
think
little
the
hard
same
to
settings that you
hear
have,
you.
Stacy.
But what?
Chris, take this after me.
There's Dan.
Yes, hello. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Say, I have my volume all the way up. It's really hard to hear.
I am actually going to turn everything over to
See nothing there.
Christian.
You'll have to do your front camera.
That's okay. Let's see if I can't find a way to turn this up, but I think that's the max volume I can get out of this.
I can hear you fine.
That's way better. I'm not sure what happened, but that's perfect.
Okay.
So what we have is gonna do kind of went old school here. So oops, I gotta flip this camera back around. So I don't know. I think we gotta raise that up. Talking about that.
Yeah, but I think, can you use this as your front camera? That's part of the issue too.
Oh yeah,
Because it's mirrored right now.
I think there's a way we can share the, if you can send the PowerPoint slides to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, we could do that. That'd be perfect.
That'd be awesome.
Yes, I was trying to figure out how to get. I'm not a Zoom connoisseur at all, so that doesn't. But this this pad over here does. Cade, we can use that. All right, we're gonna try to get this as fast as possible here to you.
Yeah, we've got about 10 minutes before we start. I know there's people logged on already, and that's fine, but that's why we give it this few minutes before to get everything set up.
Yeah. Yep. So this is Detective Cade Blumenrader. He's also with the Drug Task Force. He's just kind of
Hi.
helping out on the technical side over
Hi.
here to get stuff going.
Yeah, so if you can email it to me, then I can forward it to Christian, who can, because I don't think you have his email.
It's going to come from Sergeant Kenrick. It'll be different.
Okay.
Or what's your email?
Stacy, STACI dot Eagle, EAGLE, elk, ELK at gptchb.org.
It actually popped up, which was good.
Okay.
So, all right.
Hopefully it's not too big.
All right. We are sending it your way. It just sent, so you should have it just in a second.
Okey-doke.
Hopefully that comes through. It shouldn't be too large of a file.
Is it closed up here?
It's been doing that because I unhooked it from the network.
Do you want to run it on this one, or do you want to run it up on the screen just so you can talk over it? Do you want to just do it here? Because that way so you can thumb through
Yeah, that's fine.
your phone will have to be closer.
Did you get it yet?
Not yet.
Okay.
There, oh, nope.
Nope. Okay, I'm gonna run over to, I gotta set you down here real quick, point to the ceiling. Run over to my computer real quick, get that to you. In case that one's not sending.
Do you need this flash drive?
No, I've got a copy.
Okay. Except yours says opioid.
Chris, I'm gonna quit trying to do tech stuff and I'm gonna leave it to you.
I am on mute. I'm trying to find the.
No, you're not. I can hear you just fine.
Oh, okay, no, I think I was on mute
Oh, okay.
because I was talking and then seeing the red thing.
Stacy, I just sent it to you from my email.
Okay,
Hopefully you got that. It was only 12 megs, so it should have went. It didn't give me a reply saying it was,
I just got it.
oh, beautiful, beautiful. Okay.
You can have your seat.
And Christian, I just forwarded to you.
Well, we can be in this together. Okay. We'll set it back there.
Oh, I don't need to be in it.
Did you get it, Chris?
Yeah, I did.
Awesome.
Just got it. I'm opening it right now.
So what we'll do is I'll introduce, I'll introduce our guys over here. Well, Dan, it's you and who?
This is Cade Blumenrader.
I'm gonna let you handle that.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. I just I was having this technical difficulties and asked if he would give me a hand, and he does a lot of these presentations as well, and
Oh, good.
got a few minutes, so he can sit in and kind of help out a little bit if I miss anything. And Stacy, just so you know, at the beginning of this slide, it does say the meth opioid epidemic. So we
That's
have a
fine.
presentation that kind of works on both of them, one after the other. I did
Okay.
get, it doesn't go into the opioid side of it. I just didn't get a chance to eliminate that word. So I just don't want anyone to get too confused on it.
That's just fine. We have about 4 minutes here before. Do you know about how long it'll, I know we don't have, we can't, well, you know, we don't have to rush through. We've got 2 hours to work with here, so.
So on this, it can be, I mean, we've had them where they're a half hour and that's really rushed. We can talk for, that's the good part. And then
Okay.
usually a lot of good Q&A, and that can go on as well. So Cade may have to leave a little bit early if he has something to do, but yeah, normally I would say about an hour to an hour and a half is usually pretty sufficient as far as getting the information out and answering questions, but it could go a little longer.
Okay.
Charge good enough. You need to plug in.
Oh, no, it's good to go. I appreciate you guys setting the PowerPoint up like that, so that way.
No
That can be
problem.
seen, right?
Yes.
Okay. Good. So then,
We'll see if you go through in a day. Just one.
Usually just one. I have the 8 ounce, maybe 2. Like that.
Over the top.
So
That's easy to do.
it
It's
is
delicious.
It's cheap.
Yeah.
So no, this is not as. I mean, well, and about 100 ounces of water.
I don't drink enough water.
Last count, we had about 100 people signed up for today.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm really excited.
And you said we are what, states wide, like Montana, Wyoming?
So Great Plains Tribal Leaders Health Board represents, we work for the tribes in North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, and Iowa. But we have sent this out, through a lot of our networks and a lot of the different partnering agencies that we have. And so their reach could probably be farther. I'm pretty excited. You
Yes.
guys might be national or international
Oh, I hope
task force people. Maybe we don't want your faces out there. I don't know.
you can wear some balaclavas and cover.
Get
We
one
got
of those voice changers.
Yeah, there you go. Black or I got to run over to my desk real quick. It looks like I have about 2 minutes.
Okay. Cade, are you, is it Cade, or spell your name for me?
P-A-D-E.
Okay. And I have a bio here on Dan, but I don't for you. So I'll let you introduce yourself, okay?
Yep.
And what is your, spell your last name for me?
B-L-O-O-M-E-N-R-A-D-E-R.
Blumenrader? Is that correct?
That's correct.
And are you also an investigator?
I'm a detective with the Rapid City Police Department.
Okay. Sounds great. How many people do we have on, Chris?
There's 43 currently.
Well, you know what? I've got 12:01 and I want to go ahead and get started if that's okay with everyone. People will probably be joining later as we move through. My name is Stacy Eagle-Elk. I am with the Great Plains Tribal Leaders Health Board as the Tribal Opioid Response Program Manager. This is a grant that we have through SAMHSA. So this opportunity is actually made available through our SAMHSA grant. We did partner with some of our other programs, which is our HPOG, our Native Connections, and our Epi department have all partnered to make this possible, this training series possible. I want to introduce Investigator Dan Rose, is with the Pennington County Sheriff's Office. He started his law enforcement career in 2013 and has been with the Sheriff's Office for a little over 7 years. He spent the first 3 years of his law enforcement career in the patrol division before becoming an investigator with the Criminal Investigations Division at the Sheriff's Office. While in that department, he primarily investigated cases involving crimes against people. This included, but was not limited to, assault, rape, and murder. Approximately 2 years ago, he transitioned to the Unified Narcotics Enforcement Team, or UNET, as an investigator, where he investigates cases involving illegal narcotics, as well as drug-related overdoses. He also has with him today Detective Cade Blumenrader, which I'm going to let him tell you about himself. And Dan and Cade, I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right. Thank you. Well, my name is Cade Blumenrader. I began my law enforcement career in 2006 with the Rapid City Police Department. I worked patrol for 7 years and was after that assigned to our Criminal Investigations Division. I worked general crimes for the first year of my time in criminal investigations. For 2 years, I worked financial crimes. For a year after that, I worked domestic violence and people crimes, working on anything from assault to homicide. And then in 2016, I was assigned to the Unified Narcotics Enforcement Team, or UNET, and have been a narcotics investigator for about a little over 4 years.
Thank you, Cade. I'm gonna let you guys take over here.
Okay. So what we're here today to talk about is the course is Meth 101. So this is kind of a nice basic outline PowerPoint of meth. I know it says meth opioid, but today's just going to be on meth. So we're going to go over a little bit of the history and things of that nature. So some of our discussing points are going to be history and origin of methamphetamine. If you want to go to the next slide, please. Drug identification, signs of use and abuse, national and local impact of methamphetamine, and investigations. Now, that's not to say that's all we're going to cover. It goes a little bit deeper than that. We'll kind of branch off, but those are goals of discussion. So it's Meth 101. So it really is kind of the basic version of what we're going to be talking about today. And then after we're all wrapped up, or if in between, I know it's Zoom, it's a little hard, but we can do Q&A and try to get everyone's questions answered and to the best of our ability. So Katie, anything to add before we get going?
Not yet.
Okay. And if it's okay, I think it's Chris, I'll just have you go to the next slide. I'll just try to say that. So methamphetamine, right? Meth, he's been using it. So if anyone can see this, it's SpongeBob, of course. So we gotta, it's a serious crime and it's a serious addiction. So we're not trying to make light of it, but in the same turn, you have to a little bit because we see so much of it and it weighs heavily. So SpongeBob, this is him. Eyes are wide open. Meth is an upper. It is it ramps up the system, elevated heart rate, all those things. So heroin and opioids are downers. Meth is the upper. So people will be up for days and days and days, week at a time, when they're using constantly. All right, next slide. All right, so the history of meth. So it's been around forever. I know a lot of people understand that and maybe have heard about it, but it goes back to the late 1800s. Amphetamine first made in Germany, which is pretty crazy. And then 1919 methamphetamine created in Japan, Red P Lab. I'm gonna let Cade talk a little bit about that, to create the world's first ice. Ice are the shards, if you will, or the the chunky type nature of the meth. But I'm gonna let Cade kind of touch a little bit on Red P, if that's right.
So Red P is a lot of the programs that have been initiated over the last 10 to 20 to 30 years for the reduction of methamphetamine production. Red P was the one that was most efficient in the United States. And that would involve people taking the heads off of matches and using that phosphorus that's in there to create as a catalyst for the methamphetamine production. Very basically, there's a couple different types of way. There's the red phosphorus and there's the ammonium version of meth production. The red P is kind of what chemists discovered, and it was getting a better byproduct, or get better product, made it more accessible to make it home, a little less dangerous. And it's when we kind of started seeing, as that was getting more popular in the general public, we started to see a lot of the at-home cooks, the Gatorade bottles, the jugs at home, where people were making and blowing up their houses just based on the process that involves heat and solvents and all the chemicals that go in there. It says here, it was used by Nazis in Japan to fuel soldiers and kamikaze pilots. It was called Pervitin in World War II. It was really noticed by the Allied soldiers when they were fighting the Nazi soldiers, that they would just go for days and days and days and never have to stop for rest. And it was at the time just small amounts of what they called Pervitin, which was a methamphetamine in pill form, that these soldiers would literally be up for days without needing to take the break. Their body was just put into overdrive. Never felt the fatigue, the tiredness until a few, you could find a place to stop and actually kind of crash. And then as that chemical was discovered and made more commercially, or not even commercially available, but as people discovered they could make that at home, it's transitioned into this illicit market. I think next slide, please. This is a little bit above my head, but this talks about the chemical makeup that goes into methamphetamine. The pseudoephedrine is the base chemical that's really needed to make methamphetamine. It tricks your brain into dumping dopamine, into dumping the feel-good chemicals that go in your brain. It's just that, as you can see in this simple illustration, that it's just it's a hydroxide off of Sudafed. They just remove that off, and it just kind of tricks your brain into dumping all those chemicals in your body. People kind of equate it to sex, like just just this euphoric feeling, and your body. I don't want to get too far ahead because I'm not sure I can't remember what slide orders our slides are in. But it tricks your body into that. And then as your body gets tricked into that, you have to give it more meth to create that same amount of dopamine. You have to keep doing different things to get that same level of rush, which causes, again, that addiction, that drive for the next fix. And it kind of fries your brain. It puts your brain into functioning improperly. So it's not getting, when you're laughing at a joke or you're with friends or company or doing those enjoyable things, your body is unable to recreate that happiness. It can't get to that level of dopamine again without methamphetamine. So it takes serious treatment and correction to get back to those normal levels.
And I think what Kate is getting at is on this. So Sudafed is most people know that if you go to try to buy it in a store, you have to show your identification. You can only be allotted so much. It's because at one point when people were doing kind of the at-home labs or the one pot method, which would be like a Gatorade bottle, this is a real common product to use. So you can eliminate or limit how much people are getting. But as we'll get into in a little bit, meth is so cheap now coming out of Mexico and whatnot that we don't see a lot of labs here. I've never seen one in 2.5 years, and people, it just is more dangerous to even try to do a lab, it seems like, than it is just to buy some meth. It's just that cheap and that readily available at this point. So this has kind of gone by the wayside as far as the Sudafed, but I'm sure it's still being used out there in certain circumstances. But right now, all the measures that were put in place, I think, kind of helped hinder that. But obviously, addicts are going to find a way around. So that may be what you were getting at. But next slide, please. So as Kate was talking about, why do people use meth? So dopamine, right? We all love dopamine. We love the things we love to do, right? It makes you feel good. That's what it's about. It's about joy and happiness. So Game of Thrones is getting old now, but while you're binging Game of Thrones, catch up, your brain is producing dopamine. Anything you love to do. In other words, you're undergoing a drug-like high, right? You experience pseudo addiction to the show. That's why we binge it. That's why we have to watch the next episode. That's why they leave the cliffhanger at the end and it just goes and goes. So the drug is obviously much worse than that, but it's the same concept and principle that at the end of that high, it's like binging something. You have to get it again. I mean, it left you on a cliffhanger. You have to get it again, but you can't get back to the initial high that you originally had. So ultimately, from what we understand, the first high is going to be the pinnacle. It's going to be the climax, if you will, and then after that, you can never reach that again. So, but it does not stop people from trying, and that's where the amounts go up. So you may start with a 1/10 of a gram usage, and then pretty soon you're up to a gram because you're just trying to chase that high. Anything on that?
No. So dopamine, obviously, it's a natural chemical. Your body produces it. It's a good thing. Meth is the one that really gets your body to create that in overdrive. It tricks your brain into dumping that dopamine fix into your bloodstream. And it's a natural. I'll talk on it a little bit, but I think humans as a creature are kind of driven to look for that high. And then whether it's alcohol or sometimes, I mean, I'm not trying to negate all of these as bad things, but exercise, sex, music, like humans look for that drive for happiness and for that like good feeling. Methamphetamine is just a way to cheat that system and have a chemical tell your body to make you feel good rather than a natural experience. So,
next slide, please. So on dopamine continued. Sorry, my phone went off. Your body doesn't discriminate. As Kate was saying, you can become addicted to anything. Sex, drugs, music. To cysteamine, I can become addicted to petting dogs. In my wife's case, absolutely. We have 4 of them, so it just seems like they keep multiplying. But yes, anything that creates that happiness, that natural dopamine chemical is elevated that much more when meth is added into the equation. So dopamine, that's what we all chase. And I think like Kate said, but human nature is, a lot of adrenaline junkies, a lot of, you're always looking for the next something. It's just some individuals can't get there without a drug. So I think that's about it on dopamine. It's pretty basic. Next slide, please. Thank you, sir. So types of meth. I'll start this, and then I'll have Kate kind of jump in as well. But really, there's just a couple types. You got powder, as you can see on screen. It's indicative of local manufacturer. Really don't see any of that in this area. Like I said, a lot of it comes out of Mexico, which we're going to touch on a little bit. Crystal meth is the primary meth that we see in this area, produced by cartel and transported in. The amount that's transported in is obscene. It's a ridiculous amount. And it's so cheap nowadays. So crystal is what we see primarily up here. I've never seen the powder because we don't really have the lab stuff anymore. But crystal being the primary source and it going up in the amount we used to see, a couple grams, 8-ball, which is 3.5 grams to an ounce. And now we're seeing pounds. So it's definitely jumped up. The prices jumped down. So the quantity people can get is just that much greater.
I'd say when people see methamphetamine, most of the time it's going to look like ground salt crystals. This powder stuff, again, is very much indicative of local manufacturer. But a lot of times what we're seeing, not even so much anymore, is when meth was more rare, you would see people mix up a powder, mix some kind of salt or MSM, which is a food preservative, or other substances that they would mix in. We call that cutting methamphetamine. So if you go buy an ounce because you want to sell some of it, well, you can make it seem like 2 ounces and you can sell more product if you cut it or mix it with a foreign substance, whether it's salt or MSM or whatever other powder or crystal that kind of looks like meth. That was where we would get most of our powder appearance from, was people cutting it or breaking it down into more distributable amount. But I would say locally, people are discerning enough. They're picky about meth and that they know that they can get it easily. So if it's bad product, people aren't buying it, and the dealers go out of business, or they have to just sell the purer stuff. They're not really able to cut it because there is so much product available that if a buyer says, well, it's junk, it's not getting me the high I want, I'll go get it from someone and it's purer meth. So most of our stuff is crystal. We will see shards that are like they just came out of the bottom of a baking sheet or whatever. It's or broken down a little bit, but very little powder left in local markets.
And Stacy, I'm not sure if anyone can chime in, but is there any questions at this point that anyone has for us before we move past kind of types of meth?
If you do have questions, you can always drop them in the Q&A box, and then we can get to those.
Yep, perfect.
I don't have any right now.
They usually come towards the end. So next slide, please. So these are kind of some old stats. Bear with us on this, but comparing 2017 meth stats. So Pennington County, 116.5 pounds seized. That's a little over 52,000 or almost 53,000 grams. Gun seized in relation to meth activity is 75. I can tell you that is definitely going up. It seems like wherever drugs are, guns have really become that much more prominent. In Minnehaha County, they have 5,064 grams, 11.2 pound seized. Now, this isn't a competition, East River, West River per se, but we like to keep stats and see what we're doing as opposed to what other agencies and outfits are doing. So their gun seized in relation to meth activity in 2017 was 37. So, but I think across the board, not only South Dakota wide, but nationwide, and definitely in this area, if there's drugs, we are finding a lot of guns that go along with this. It is just that prevalent. If a car gets stopped or pulled over and there's drugs in the car, it seems, I would say 7 out of 10 times that there's a gun somewhere in the vehicle or on the person. So it's really becoming that much more prevalent that they need to protect their product. They need to protect themselves. So it's becoming definitely more dangerous in that aspect.
Dan, we do have, and Kate, we have a couple of questions here.
Yeah.
The first one is, what is it in meth that makes people, what in meth makes people's mood swing when taken?
So in meth, the mood swing, what can happen is so you ingest, whether you smoke it, you bang it as an injection, or however you get your meth into your system, it gives you an elevated state. People say it feels good, things of that nature. But what happens is you take more of it, and you go on a bender. So you see you're on a 2, 3, 4 day bender. If anyone has ever stayed up for 24, 36 hours, 48 hours, even without any sort of drug, but you just stay up, that after that amount of time, you kind of get delirious. You can't speak fluently. You almost feel like you're a little intoxicated. It's obvious that your body isn't resting. So meth elevates you. Your body isn't resting. It doesn't even need to rest, but you're still going to have the same side effects as if you weren't sleeping. Your body needs that. Then it can go into hallucinations, which leads to obviously people seeing things that aren't there, or paranoia, believing things that aren't true. And then it all escalates and elevates at that point. So then pretty soon you're on 3, 4, 5 day bender and with no sleep and all meth. And when you start coming down off of that, it's a shock to the system, because now you don't have the drug. You're extremely tired, and a lot of your mind is definitely going to play tricks on you.
It throws the chemicals out of balance in your brain. What's supposed to be working at its normal level, it throws a wrench into that. So nothing's working like it's supposed to. It's like putting diesel in a gas engine. Like, it's going to mess with things. Like, it's just taking your body out of its normal course, kind of throwing things out to where they're not functioning properly. And the brain is such a powerful part of our body that it messes with that, and that gets the paranoia, the anger, the hypersexualization, where it just skews all those chemicals improperly, and your body can't cope.
And just real quick on that, we know now, through research over the last however many years, that gut health and mental health are tied directly together. They're correlated. So if your gut health is out of whack, you can have mental health issues, just because it isn't giving you the right nutrients, micronutrients, all that stuff. So someone who's using, more than likely isn't eating as well. So after so many days, not only are you tired, you're fatigued, you're high, you have no nutrition. So everything, like Kate said, is completely out of balance, which is going to start causing your brain to not be able to function in an appropriate manner, and to actually see the world as it actually is. It's definitely going to play tricks on you. That's the kind of the layman's terms of it. But everything goes out of whack, and then that leads to the paranoia, the elevated state, the anger, which then could lead to what is that when they sweat, take clothes off?
Just overheating.
Yeah, we call to those calls. You know what I mean? Yeah. We'll think of the word in a little bit. I apologize for that.
There's another couple of questions here. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, go ahead.
one that I have actually is, why are the numbers so much higher here in Pennington County versus Minnehaha County?
I would say this one might be skewed just a little bit. I think this could include trooper stops on the highway.
That's
So
fair.
if that, I mean, that would probably skew it a little bit, but I would say overall, the numbers are probably pretty consistent. I think we got a quick sheet end of last year. This last year was kind of a weird stats year, but Sioux Falls and Rapid City are pretty consistent. Generally, they're probably within ballpark. South Dakota, especially the Black Hills, are a destination for tourists. I-90 runs through, so it's a corridor for drugs coming through that go from the West Coast or Denver over to Chicago, Minneapolis, the Twin Cities area. So that's part of it. There's a pretty high poverty rate in Rapid City, and that comes with drug abuse. I would say that's, I mean, I think the poverty rate has a lot to do with it, more than the tourism.
That kind of leads us into the next couple of questions.
Okay.
One says, you mentioned that it comes cheaply now. So like, what would someone pay for it? I was just wondering how cheaply they can get it.
Yeah, I don't know if we get into the monetary stuff, but we'll speak to that now.
We do, it is just, it's a little higher than it used to be. So.
Yeah, so trying to equate a gram of meth is about the amount of meth in a sugar packet. So if you went to the restaurant and you poured sugar in your coffee, that's approximately a gram. And that would cost you about $100. Now, the problem with, I mean, it depends on the user, obviously, but someone could use anywhere from a quarter gram to a gram each time they use. So if you're having to support a habit of buying a gram for $100 and you have to use every day, you're spending $700 a week on your drug habit. And then I mean, I know I couldn't afford that, but if someone who's living in poverty and this is their, I'll get to the causation of it later, but if you're having to spend $700 a week, but you don't have the money to afford that, now you have to steal from Walmart or grocery stores or the gas station, or you burglarize someone's garage and steal a power washer, and you trade stolen property for dope. Or you've got a buddy whose grandma has a checkbook and they can forge you a check, so you end up taking a stolen check. So I'm speaking all over this presentation a little bit, but the money, the poverty, and this ties to drugs. So drugs is often called a victimless crime, right? Like they're only hurting themselves. It's really bad for their body. You know, maybe the ones they love are affected by it, but it affects everybody because they're out having to put themselves in harm's way. They're stealing from neighbors. They're stealing from family members. They're stealing from stores, which costs more for the consumer to go up to cover those losses. So drug use itself might be a victimless crime, but the symptoms of drug use, the societal problems that go along with drug use are huge and affect everybody. And we understand the addiction level. Like we're not out trying to hammer the users and trying to like really get them in trouble. But sometimes if you've got kids or you've got family members, sometimes the only way to get you help is to get in trouble. Like sometimes you need to get your hands smacked and you need to be grounded. And I think that's kind of the view that we see is like, we have to start with the users to some extent because they're the ones who can get us after the dealers. But we're also hoping to get these users into treatment. So yeah, you're in trouble, but now we have a judge saying that you have to go to treatment or that you have to stay sober, or we get you on 24/7 to help hold you accountable. But to go back to your original question, the prices vary. I'd say roughly around here, a gram of meth is probably about $100. And then it's kind of like Costco. If you get in bigger amounts, you get a cheaper price. So if you're buying wholesale, you get a better price. If you're getting smaller amounts, what we call a 1/16 of an ounce or a t-shirt, you could, I mean, you're still spending $130, $125, somewhere around there just for that amount. And that's a very small amount. So.
And one last question is, how easy is it for people to hide this addiction? I've known people that have used specifically at work and it was never caught or brought up or addressed.
There are, so even with opiates, but with meth users, there are functional meth users, there are functional heroin users. It depends on their amount, what they're using it for. I would say some people are probably treating some underlying medical condition sometimes. Some adults with ADD, they might be kind of self-medicating. Maybe it's easier for them to focus when they're on meth. So they might not notice it. I think where people start seeing it in their family members is when it becomes that long-term use where they're starting to lose weight, property starting to disappear, they're standoffish, they're agitated, they're aggressive. But I would say it's not impossible to hide it. It depends on the level of use and I'd say some people have more addictive personalities. So once they start, they're gonna really jump into the addiction. And some people are less, I would say, more casual users where they're treating maybe that ADD, or we talk to people and they say, well, it helps me focus and it kind of takes the edge off. And so it's not surprising to say that someone worked with somebody and didn't know it. Like that doesn't shock me at all, because there are plenty of people who can kind of keep it under control. But I would say they're in the minority.
Mhm.
Thank you. That's all the questions that we had pop up.
Okay. We'll keep going. I'm sure we'll come back to something.
Next slide, please. So this is a map of the US. I think maybe,
They've got an extra slide from what we got, but that's fine.
got it.
Oh, that's a map of South Dakota. How did it get here?
Gotcha. Maybe go to the next one. Should be a map of the US. Apologize for that. Yes, perfect. So we were talking about the ease of meth coming up from cartels. So this map may be a little hard to see, but what it's laid out in is kind of a color code. So you have the different cartels is how it's kind of color coded as far as the US, who has control of certain areas of the US and whatnot. So our primary area is orange, so is Denver. Kind of the whole Midwest is more of an orange, which is going to be Sinaloa cartel. I know most people have heard of them. They, started back in the day with marijuana, and then, once marijuana becomes legal and the money, the cash crop isn't there as much, they have to make a transition to keep the money alive. So it's that much easier to make meth and ship it up. So our main area seems to be kind of dictated by the Sinaloa cartel, or that is where most of the meth comes from. Not to say that there isn't any other cartels that ship it up to this area or to Denver, Chicago, and then it comes over. But I think they really try to stick to their areas and probably get pretty aggressive when people try to jump on their turf, just like any other gang would. So East Coast, things of that nature. You got some blue in there, which would be, possibly Juarez cartel. But by and large, Sinaloa seems to kind of have a majority of the United States, with a little dabble of like Juarez and like Gulf cartels and whatnot. So that's kind of how it breaks down. I'm sure it changes all the time. There's always a battle for property and power, but that's the majority of what we see.
So it was, like I said, I started as a street cop in 2006. And when I was first new to Rapid City, and someone would say, well, I would say if an officer was on a traffic stop and they found meth in a car, I would go look, because it was so rare. Like you wanted to see what meth looked like. It was that new, it was novel to cops back then. And I would say now, when cops stop cars and they're dealing with our violent crime and our guns and stuff, if we don't find meth, it's kind of unusual. It's very common now. So every cop who's new has seen meth. Every cop who's been on a couple years has probably arrested people with half ounces or around that. Like, it's very common. But you used to interview people and you would say, hey, where'd you get this from? You try and get the intelligence to generate a case. And they would say, oh, it's a cartel guy. And I used to be like, oh, shut up. Like I think a lot of us had that naive, like, no way is the cartel here. But being in this role in the last few years, and even before that, you'd run into people, and I could tell you, we've worked active cases with people who were moved around the country by cartel. We had a woman who was, I would say, in her late 50s, and her job was she would be planted somewhere by the cartel. She would move dope. It was heroin and meth. They would pay for her housing and her car rentals, and they would have her courier stuff back and forth. She got indicted, arrested, and then was out on pretrial release, and then moved to another part of the country. They moved her and said, okay, you're burned there. You're not going to be any good in South Dakota, but we're going to move you over to, I think it was ended up being Kentucky or Tennessee, that region. It's very much a business for cartels. So it's money. Like, there's so much profit in it for these cartels that they're going to do what they can to market it, sell it, transport it, get people addicted to it. And it's run very, very much like a business. It's like I said, it surprised a lot of cops, and a lot of cops, even myself included, years ago, were like, cartel's not here, but they are. Like, you're not going to tell them all apart. Like I said, we had a almost 60-year-old woman moving dope for the cartel because it paid her bills. She was able to afford to live because they would take care of her. So,
And just so it helps maybe clarify how they come up with these color codes and Sinaloa cartel and whatnot is, let's say you got like grandma's brownie recipe, right? It's got certain ingredients, and that's what it is. And maybe she writes it down on a note card for you someday, and you actually get to make them like that. The cartels are very, very similar with how they make their meth. So they all have a certain style or an ingredient base that they use. So the meth there's an FBI lab in I believe it's Chicago, where they can break it down and see each component of it, and that's how they can tie it back to what's that?
and the purity level.
Yes, and the purity level, and be able to say, okay, this is Sinaloa's because it's their recipe, or this is Juarez Cartels because this is their recipe. So much like anyone's recipe drawer, they have the same thing. So it's able to be broken down, look at all the components, and then tie it back to whatever cartel it is. And that's how we can get this graph and chart across the US on who's supplying it, where's it coming from.
And I would touch on this, just one more thing. So he touched on it just a little bit, but years ago, Mexico the cartels made a bunch of money with marijuana. There was a great region in Mexico for the growth of marijuana. They used that process and that procedure to figure out how to transport it, how to smuggle it, how to get it into the United States where the money was. There was a great market for it when it was illegal all over the country. Well, and then Washington and Oregon and I think California start legalizing the recreational growth of it. So the cartel loses out on that money because now it can be grown in the United States. The transport cost isn't as high. There's less risk trying to get it across an international border. So people are starting to go to those source states for their marijuana. The cartels had spent the previous 30 years working on how to transport illegal narcotics. And once the cash dried up from marijuana or became less profitable, they transitioned to the methamphetamine and the heroin market because there is still so much money. Those are still illegal in the United States and in Mexico actually, but there is such a markup and an available market for it. So they had that process was already in place. They already knew how to transport, who to get it to, who to talk to. And they transport those drugs to what I would call wholesale centers or hub cities. So Denver, Spokane, Chicago, Minneapolis, all the major metropolitan areas. There's stash houses, there's cartel members there. They hold on to it. They make the connections. And then South Dakota, specifically Rapid City, people can drive from Rapid City down to a hub city, make their connections however they make them, and then bring it back to Rapid City for distribution. And it's like that all over the country. There's just hub cities. It's kind of like like I said, it's very much a business. So they run it like warehouses. There's a warehouse city and then sub-distributors. And then the meth from Rapid City probably ends up in the little towns around the region. Just like you would have a warehouse for Costco or Sam's Club or whatever, and then they send it to Walmart, and then they send it to their local, it just spreads out, so.
And when the
I have a
cartels,
few questions. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. There's a few questions whenever you get ready for some.
Go ahead.
we're ready.
Okay. How much meth actually comes from cartels compared to it being made here?
I would say greater than 99%. I've worked one lab case in my 4 years here. There's some guys in our office who've been in the, and actually when I was still in patrol, I discovered one a mobile lab. And that would have been in 2011, 10 or 11, probably several years ago. So out of my time, in my 15 years, I've seen 2 labs. We have guys on the task force who have been here 9 years, and they've seen 2 to 3 to 4. So I would say a super majority of meth comes from at base, the cartels or Mexico.
Okay. Next question is, how often is drug abuse caught in hospital/clinic setting? For example, patient tests positive, but vehemently denies use, saying something is wrong with the test.
Well, illegal drug use is very rarely reported by clinics to law enforcement. There's HIPAA, there's all sorts of stuff that would prevent them from reporting it. Where law enforcement or social services usually gets in is with a child born with meth in their system. So they do take that step to get in DSS and law enforcement involved if a baby has meth in its system when it's born. But for the most part, I wouldn't be able to speak to whether doctors are noticing it, whether staff is noticing it. We've done these presentations at clinics and at hospitals before, and most of the nurses can say, well, I kind of thought this person was on meth, and I think a lot of people have their suspicions based on the behaviors or the symptoms, the skin or whatever, the hair coming out, things like that. But I would say very rarely do they ever report it to law enforcement unless there's a child involved.
Okay. Who would you turn someone in to that is smoking and taking care of others?
It depends on your local task force. So South Dakota has a tip 411 line. I make sure I get that correct before we end this call, but it's tip 411. It's a text message you can send to. And just say, hey, I know someone's, it depends on how anonymous you want to be. If you want to call your local law enforcement, say, you can still call in anonymously. But if it's in care of children, if it's in care of adults, or if it's, it kind of depends. Just DSS is a resource. Your local law enforcement is a resource to report to. Obviously, I think one of my personal opinion is, it's a shame when adults have to turn to an addiction and they have to deal with it. They're dragging other people through that. But my big concern, and where I get my bleeding heart, is for the children who get dragged along by no fault of their own. So I personally, whenever we get a tip about children, I do follow up on those. I know law enforcement around the region is very similar. But there's sometimes the hard part is proving it. We can't just act on a hunch. So videos, photos, we have to still corroborate that. So someone might call in and say, hey, my daughter-in-law, my son, whatever, they're smoking meth around my grandkids. We follow up with that, and then we still have to corroborate that. So we would never go to somebody and say, hey, someone called and said you're smoking meth. We're still going to corroborate that with more investigative efforts to say, yeah, I agree, they're probably smoking meth, and then we deal with it on a criminal level. And then usually that involves DSS trying to get involved also.
Thank you for that.
Yeah,
We've
sorry.
got a couple of more here. No, that's fine. This is great discussion, and I appreciate the questions. What type of rehabilitation programming does the state have for meth users, or is it primarily a disciplinary approach with jail time and little rehab built in?
That has changed over the last few years. And can I get on a soapbox a little bit, but there are resources now. There's a lot more treatment options than there ever used to be in South Dakota. I think that was one of our slow, it was kind of slow to develop in South Dakota. Like it was, we just didn't have the resources available for treatment that we needed. And then I'll get into my personal opinion and I'll tell you, like, I totally agree that when someone is addicted to meth, they need treatment. You're not probably to quit cold turkey or to quit on your own is, I would say, almost impossible. It's going to be very difficult. But until we hold people accountable and say, you're in jail and we'll send you out for treatment, and then you come back to jail where you can't use drugs, like we're kind of spinning in circles. We're spinning our wheels a little bit because generally a meth addiction lasts for 90 days. If you quit, if you had to go cold turkey, it would be 90 days before you had no cravings. Like you're still addicted to meth for 90 days. And if we arrest you because you're using or because you have a little bit of meth in your pocket, and we put you in jail and the judge says, okay, go out and be sober and we'll come back to court, well, we're kind of setting you up for failure because you're still an addict. You still want that craving. Your body wants that. Like people will do crazy things for addictions. So if we set you out without holding you somewhere to keep you safe, and we just say, hey, you need to go to treatment, or we'll work on treatment under sentencing, I don't know how many people that actually can work for. So my personal opinion is that people need to be incarcerated for their addictions, as long as we're treating the underlying addiction at the same time. I don't think we can just lock them up and expect them to get over it, but I don't think we can let them out and hope they just take care of it on themselves. I think it's going to take a better process through the courts, through social services, through the medical industry to say, we understand you're an addict, but your behavior while you're addicted is an issue for other people. You're stealing, you're assaulting people, you're destroying your family, you're not going to work, you're not helping yourself or your family. So I think that's where the issue is. I don't have a good number for you on how many treatment facilities. All I know is that in the last few years, we've gotten a few. There's probably 4 outpatient treatments in Rapid City that I'm aware of.
So if I can touch on that, there's treatment facilities are getting better. So there's one in Sioux Falls that people will get shipped to from here to over there. One in Sturgis, the care campus, plus the outpatient treatment facilities. The hard part is the person who is going to that has to want to quit. So a lot of times forced treatment from the courts is just that. You're forcing them into it. They don't really want to quit. They go through the motions. Either there's some failure there, which is a high rate, where they kind of wash out and go back to using, or they complete it knowing that it'll just help them get out of their charges, and they're just still waiting to get that done to go back. So it's really a demand type situation where they still want it, but they got to want to have the treatment. So we're not up to speed and up to par on our treatment facilities, but we also, like Kate said, need to help these people to get the proper treatment right away instead of just setting them up for failure. So the facilities are getting better around the area, around the state, but people still have to want to quit, and we have to help them to get to that point.
I think that's one of the hardest parts, is because you can talk to an addict and say, hey man, like, do you like using? And some people do. Some people enjoy it, and they don't see an issue with it. They don't see what they're doing to their family and friends and job and their body. So until someone comes to that realization that they're ruining their body or their relationships or their life, and they see the benefit of quitting over the benefit of using and feeling good, it's really hard to get them to commit to a treatment program.
Great, thank you for your answers. I have a couple here regarding the cartel. Do you provide protection for people who have been involved and are trying to get out but risk their lives if they stop distributing or working for the cartel? And then the second one, which goes right along with this, is would it be hard to stop the cartel and getting drugs to the sellers?
The first part. So that's something we do take seriously, is the threats and the risk of violence. For the most part, I would say violence, unless you're a big deal, unless you're really snitching on the cartel, like you're high level dealer, for the most part, I think what we have seen is the cartel understands the risk of dealing with people and having someone talk on them, but they do a good job generally of trying to isolate themselves from contact and identifiability. So they have multiple phones, they're hard to pick up, they're hard to find. So if someone, let's say someone does want to provide information, or if they want to quit selling drugs for the cartel, and they come to law enforcement and say, here's everything I know. There are protocols in place for protection of people, but it kind of depends on the level, the scope, how far their reach is when they're talking about it. Because for the most part, when, let's say, someone is bringing drugs up here from the cartel, that person is very, very minor too, where they're what we call a courier. They're a transporter, and that's it. There are times where there is an elevated risk, and we do try and mitigate that. I'd say at the local level, at Rapid City and Pennington County level, we don't have resources to put anybody in asset protection or witness protection. We don't have funds to rehouse them. We don't have that level, but that's when the federal side can get involved, depending again on the scope of how big their discussion is, how big their information is. If there are credible threats of violence, if they've had acts against them already, that all weighs into that decision, and that goes through our U.S. Attorney's Office. The marshals, the United States Marshals, they're in charge. They're charged with witness protection. But generally, I would say I don't want to understate the level of threat and the safety of it. But I would say, for the most part, the cartel gets by on the cartel's reputation. Around here specifically, I've never seen any cartel-related violence. Usually if someone is assaulted for talking to the cops or being an informant, the most I've seen is a bloody nose, like someone gets beat up in jail. And again, I'm not trying to downplay that violence level, but for the most part, people around here don't want to hurt each other. Obviously there's always some threat of getting beat up or assaulted for it. But for the most part, I would say the cartel gets by on the reputation of, well, I'm cartel. Oh crap, I don't want to say anything. And that's very common. I mean, that plays to their benefit. They don't want people talking about them. So it is to their benefit.
On the second, can you repeat the second question, Stacy?
Yeah.
Would it be difficult to stop the cartel? Look at it. Here.
How difficult would it be? And then there was another one that actually asked, if you know the cartel is here, why don't you do something about them?
So I'll answer kind of the first one. How difficult it would be to stop the cartel from transporting up? So in the broad scene and spectrum of all this, between DEA, Border Control, DOJ, there are years where they put a $2 billion dent in the cartel industry as far as the drugs and cash that are seized coming across the border, being transported up. And that still, unfortunately, doesn't make even a small dent into the other drugs that are getting up here, as well as the cash that's getting back there. So, some of these cartels are making, upwards of 100 million a month, kind of depending. So the money is massive, and their techniques for smuggling dope and heroin and anything are always progressing. So the cartel has enough money to hire the best construction workers, the best engineers, the best of everything. So when they're smuggling it in semis or cars, the hides, what we call them, or the areas where they can hide drugs at in the vehicle, are at a different level than what a person would normally think. I mean, these are created by high-end engineers or extremely talented individuals. So it's always going to be a battle. It's us against them on that, and we have to always up our well. But to stop a business size that they are, is going to be extremely difficult.
On my honest answer is you'll never get rid of cartel drug distribution until you get rid of the demand of drug users. And there will always be people looking for drugs. As long as there's money to be made, they will continue to up their game, conceal differently, be smarter, sneakier. And we're behind the curve all the time. Like we learn that stuff and it takes us time to get that. But by the time we've learned that, they might be working on something else. So until you get rid of drug users, you're going to have drug dealers. And then to the other question, the second part of that was, why don't we do something about the cartel? And we do. The previous question kind of talked about it, which is you still have, like, we still have to have information. I'm going to say this and sound like a jerk, but the problem with law enforcement is we follow the rules. So we have search warrants to go through. We have procedures to follow. We have constitutional law we have to take into consideration. And we can't just grab somebody and say, hey, I know what your drugs are. We can't just go into a house because, let's say Dan bought drugs from somebody, says, hey, that guy has drugs in his house. Well, I need more evidence than that. I have to go to a search warrant. I have to get proof so I can just go to a judge and say, here's all the reasons I think this is there. So we do deal with the cartel. We've actually got a couple of recent cases that have direct ties. We have direct contact with subjects in Mexico, and that's a local agency. I mean, if you think about the county sheriff, the Rapid City Police Department making direct contact with Mexico, I mean, that's significant. But that's not the only cartel member. I mean, there's thousands and thousands. It's a huge network. So we might pick off one or two, but then someone steps up into their place, or they move to a different house and they start back up, and it takes us a little bit. We're always behind the curve. We are always trying to address it, but there's just so much volume. There's thousands of drug dealers and a couple hundred cops in Rapid City. So we're outnumbered. We're outnumbered by users. We're outnumbered by dealers. And so we just take it as we can. We take little bites at a time, and we try and make a difference with, if we can save 20 people from addiction, or if we can get one person off the streets and into counseling and treatment and it works, that's a win. But I'd say the reason it's so difficult is because of the volume. There's just so much, and there's only so few cops, and cops follow the rules. So.
Thank you for that. There's a comment here, but the last question is, are there any medications out there to help someone who is withdrawing from meth?
Go ahead.
No, as far as meth related withdrawals, there is some stuff that I mean, you can use kind of like a pain medication, whether it be like ibuprofen or something, but there's nothing really like there is with opiates or heroin. With that you have Suboxone and things of that nature, but with meth, it really is kind of it has to run its course and get out of your system. Like I said, you could take some, as far as like an aspirin, ibuprofen. They might even provide or, prescribe something depending on their level of withdrawal symptoms to maybe ease pain, but you would want to be careful of that because they're obviously have an addictive personality. You don't want to get addicted to an opioid. So not so much with that. It kind of has to run its course. Plus, and we'll touch on this when we do the opioid fentanyl one, heroin or opioids and alcohol are the only two drugs that you can die from withdrawal symptoms. So meth, although it's horrible and it's going to be not a fun time for the person who's going through it, for the most part, it just has to run through its system, and then there'll be light on the other side. It takes about a week, roughly. My wife was a nurse in a jail for a while, and she said within about a week, the person sobers up and they feel fantastic and whatnot. But during that week, there's a lot of hallucinations, anger, violence, things of that nature. So they did provide some sort of medication to help with. She never told me. But I think more than anything, it's more of just something to kind of help them sleep, if anything, like an Ativan or something to kind of maybe sleep through it rather than to have to be awake for most of it.
Okay, well, let's move along with your presentation. Thank you for all the questions and the responses.
You are welcome. If we can go to the next slide. So why is Mexico the primary source? So we talked about this a little bit ago with Sudafed and being locked up behind the counter. So anhydrous ammonia, at one point that was a common chemical in the US where, people were making their own labs, but they were stealing it from farms and ranches, things of that nature. So field guard ammonia tank locks were created. Sudafed was put behind the shelves. So we made it harder for individuals to get a product to be able to create meth on their own. And then Mexico stepped up to the plate, and first of all, it's way easier to transport meth, cocaine, heroin, because it's so much smaller. So you can fit so much more into like a car, plane, boat, than you can a bundle of marijuana, which is really hard to compress. It's so large. But this provided, I hate to say it, but almost kind of put the ball in the cartel's court, because we made it really hard for individuals in this area to make their own, which is good. But then the cartel just lowers prices and makes sure they get it transported, and that's the fix to the problem. So that's why Mexico is a primary source. All right. Next slide, please. So we were talking a little bit ago about addicts and dealers. Not sure if you heard me. If you could flip to the next slide, I appreciate it. All right. So addicts and dealers. So we kind of talked about this a little bit. So what we see mainly in the Rapid City surrounding area is an addict dealer. So we'll kind of go through these real quick, but a straight addict typically buys enough for personal use, maybe enough to make share with an associate. Addict dealer, which is what we see a lot of, deals to make their habit free. So they may start out using meth, and then, as Cade was talking about, it gets expensive, right? Pretty soon it's $700 a week. So what do? They round up some money. They get people to throw down with them. They go and get, a quarter pound of meth or something, and then they can be the seller and yet still have enough product for them to use while they make money to go get more. So we see a lot of the addict dealer mix. The dealer who uses, but primary concern is money. That's not super common around here. And then dealer with no use. It's like the older lady individual Kate was talking about. Individual is the most sophisticated and will use the most sophisticated means to distribute controlled substances. So I can't give away too much of what we're doing as far as, some of these cases involving cartel, but, they're a different organization. It's not an addict dealer that you're just dealing with. It usually is someone who is a dealer with no use. So it really is about the money. So there isn't those slip ups where they accidentally get pulled over and they're high, or they got a needle in their pocket, or they've got a baggie in their car. There's no risk and no chance that they're taking as far as that goes. So it's a different level of sophistication. Therefore, it's a lot harder to investigate. It just takes that much more time. And I'd like to think that we're pretty dang good at what we do, and we definitely end up winning those battles. But it just takes a lot more time because you don't have the little mess ups by the addict dealer who you can catch them 2-3 times and can get the information that you're needing on who their source of supply is and things of that nature. So addict dealer, pretty strong and pretty heavy in this area. Dealer with no use, definitely not as strong. We're seeing maybe a little bit more of it, but still the addict dealer is the primary.
And I would say that the courts even see the difference between that. Like in sentencing, someone who is an addict, but they're selling to support their habit, they're not getting the sentence that the non-using dealers are. We've got some non-using dealers who have come up, who've been prosecuted here, and their sentences are 3 to 5 to 10 times what a user's sentence are. And I think people see the difference in that. That's a predatory nature. You're preying upon the addict level and the weaknesses of other people who are in a bad spot just to make yourself some money. And I think society and the law and the courts see that as a negative. We've had people who have come up and said, well, I don't use heroin, I just use meth, but heroin, there's a lot more money in heroin, so I'll sell that around here. Or same thing with meth. Well, I don't use, but there's good money in it, so I just use it, or I just sell it and that's it. But like you said, they're sober, they're thinking clearly, they're not making the same little mistakes that our other users are, because they're not in a mind altered state, and they're more difficult to catch. But ultimately our goal with any investigation is to find the source. So when we do talk to somebody, our goal isn't to hem them up any worse than they have to be. We kind of talked about this a little bit ago, but like, my goal is to get to whoever they're getting it from, and then I can build a case on that person and see who they're getting it from. And if I can find the person who is actually driving it to Rapid City or driving it to South Dakota, great. And if I can find their source, cool. And then we get our federal partners involved and we try and hold them accountable. But the dealers are the ones who prey upon people, and we understand the addiction level of the users. And like we already talked about, I think they need help. I don't think it's a good habit. I think that the behavior while you're using is a societal problem. It's the thefts and the assaults and all the stuff we already talked about. So I do think users need to be held criminally accountable, but they also need that treatment. It's the dealers that are really our focus. That's we're really trying to get to those dealers, especially the non-using dealers. That's our biggest goal.
And if I could touch on something, I worked a heroin case, and something that is very important to me and kind of dear to my heart is I think sometimes it's easy to think that we get into this career as maybe like adrenaline junkies, or we just kind of want to put everyone away, but it really is about helping people and making sure that that person has a chance at having a successful life. It just happens to be that they sometimes have to get in trouble to do that. But throughout the course of this investigation, this individual was ultimately arrested and was federally indicted. Although I ran into this individual not long ago, and it was an odd sort of situation where he's sober and working and I'm there, but it was really great because we had a small conversation, and that person told me that we saved their life. And that means a lot, because that really is why I do it. It's not, I don't get any joy or thrill out of putting people who are addicted away. There is no joy in that. It really is about helping somebody to become a better person. They have a family, they have parents, they have kids probably. So to be around for that and to be happy for that. So those moments just keep me going. I know that's a bit on a personal level, but that is why we do it. So going after the dealer who doesn't care about that person, doesn't care about their family, their kids, doesn't really care anything about them, and all they want to do is deal to them so they can make their money. I think that's sick. And those are the people that we're after, because they just really don't care. They don't care about the society, the individuals, anything. So that's like Kate said, we work up the ladder to get after the dealer. The user is someone that we do talk to, but we definitely try to get them help, point them in the right direction. Sometimes it means jail, but even then, try to help them out.
A quick question here. Have you found sex traffickers are using meth to get business, either as workers or buyers?
It's a great question. We don't see a lot of the sex trafficking in this area. Our ICAC division, our Internet Crimes Against Children, we speak with them frequently, and what they see a lot of is a lot of child porn type stuff in their cases on phones, computers, and whatnot. But it's not to say, I know human trafficking exists, and I know it even exists around here, but we just don't see the volume, or we don't really see any of it that seems to be tied with any of the drug cases that we're seeing locally in this area.
I would say the few cases that I've kind of touched on or met with someone who I thought was being trafficked. One tie, I would say there's some drug nexus to it. I think there's definitely a connection in the ones that I've seen. but at the same time, like proving that until they're ready to prove or to say that, yeah, like I got into this, like I owed this guy money and he said I could pay it off by being a hooker for a little bit, or he'd keep me high if I would just have sex with whoever. Those are pretty rare because that's an embarrassing conversation for a lot of women to have, or even men to have, and say, I'm in this because I was an addict and they hooked me into it. So I think there's probably some of that, but it's probably underreported because there's some embarrassment that people have when they're having to say they got themselves in a situation or that they were an addict. And, you know, there's some, it's a very personal thing to have to talk about. So I think some people get embarrassed and don't want to report it. But I'd say there's usually a tie. I'd say when we do talk to women who are we do prostitution stings, or when I did in the past, usually there was some kind of drug nexus, whether it was marijuana or meth or whatever. There's, and then I'd say not even if it's under the strict definition of sex trafficking, but probably within that realm is, I have spoken with dealers who say that they would get paid for their drugs by sex. So I've got some heroin. If you want it, you can perform a sex act. That does occur.
Yes.
But I've just never been in, like, and I would say that's fairly common. I don't think a lot of those progress to this true sex trafficking where they're being taken somewhere or being told they have to do something. But I would say it's a terrible relationship if a woman has to support her addiction by performing a sex act on a dealer. So, like I said, I don't think like we're not seeing the true like Taken, where people are getting kidnapped and pulled into sex slavery and doing that. But sex has a monetary value to a lot of these dealers, and it is used to trade for drugs.
And we're going to have a session with Holly Strand talking about that and how those two intersect with one another. It's another session later on in the series. But this is a question I have. Just my grant, we call it tribal opioid response. However, we're addressing as well stimulant use, and today is primarily meth. But how prevalent is cocaine in this area? Is that an issue as well?
Yeah, we can find it. It's less common. It's around here. I would say it's much less prevalent than meth, but cocaine is another problem that we deal with. I'd say we usually have a couple cocaine cases per year, and we can have dozens or hundreds of meth cases a year. And that's just this task force too. That's not even just the patrol divisions of our respective agencies. So
would that be due to costs?
Yeah, cocaine is a little bit more expensive. I'm trying to so methamphetamine is manufactured in Mexico with chemicals that come from China. They're not regulated the same way they are in the United States. They can just go through ports and get smuggled in much more easily than they can in the US. And the cartels especially we call it providing on front. So if I'm giving you meth and it's worth $5,000, I'll just say, okay, I'll give it to you right now. And that's a huge amount. Like I probably wouldn't do that as a first time associate with you. But let's say I'm just giving you a half ounce and it's worth several $100s. I say, okay, like you don't have to pay me now, but when you come back, you pay me that, and then you pay me for the next one. So we call that going on front. Like, I'll give you drugs, you owe me money. So anyway, the cartel is willing to do that with heroin because they can manufacture it, and they're willing to do that with meth because they manufacture it. But cocaine actually has to come up from Central America or South America. And so the cartel is actually purchasing that from another cartel in South America. They don't front cocaine like they do heroin and meth. They've already had to put some cost into purchasing it, getting it internationally traveled across some borders. So cocaine is a lot harder to front, and there's an increased cost with that. So I would say that's a big reason we don't see it as much, is because of the expense.
And so cocaine is, so 70 to 80% of the US's cocaine is still provided by Colombia. So everyone knows Pablo Escobar, but even though he's been gone forever, Cali Cartel took over after that and they were gone, but it's still produced there. They have the land that produces coca leaf. So it is the primary source of cocaine for the world and about 70 to 80% of it for the US. They've made a lot of deals with narco traffickers in Mexico, and they run it to, a lot of times what happens now is they run it to Panama, because once you're in Panama, you don't have to go through customs. So it can get loaded onto different containers as far as your cocaine in any drug, but that's kind of their the deal that they have set up. But cocaine is still kind of looked at as a rich man's drug and like a party drug. So it's a little more expensive for what you're going to get. So people are going to use it on the weekends at a party, things of that nature, but we don't see the addictive property of it like meth, where it's they're on like 3, 4, 5 day bender, and they're just up all day and whatnot. So not to say that isn't happening, but it's not very prevalent in this area because of the cost and because of it's not as easy to get, because like Kate was talking about, it's not something that can just make its way here easily through the cartel.
Thank you.
All right, we'll jump to the next slide.
Go in a couple minutes here.
Yeah, okay. There you go, thanks, man. So risk of violence, we'll just kind of cruise through this. In LA, 35% of meth users age 18 to 25 were found to have committed violence under the influence of the drug. Pittsburgh, 80% of 19-year-olds who sold hard drugs such as cocaine were found to also carry a gun. Like I said before, we're seeing a lot of guns with drugs. So in these pictures right here,
These are all rapid.
these are all rapid cases. Yep, right there. All these guns are tied to cases that were investigated here through UNET. So guns are definitely a problem with drugs, and it's ramping up. It's definitely getting a lot worse.
There's also, guns are a lot of times used as currency. So if you trade a gun, you might get an ounce of meth for that, depending on the gun. And then it's a cash industry. So if you're walking around with a bunch of cash, you're going to want to protect your cash. You carry a gun to do that, so you're not getting robbed or let's just go hand in hand. If you're willing to protect yourself, or you're dealing with people who are high and not thinking clearly, you're going to want to protect yourself with a weapon. So
Next slide. Risk of violence continued. How do you approach someone? So this is just kind of a real basic, calm, cool, collected deflection. So someone who's elevated or is having paranoia or things of that nature, be calm, put space in between you, and then either you call the police or find someone to call the police. You don't feel obligated to have to take that individual down and hold them and whatnot. So just calm and cool and collected, get your space, and get a hold of the authorities or have someone do that. Next slide.
I gotta bail.
Okay. Thank you, Kate. Kate's got to head out. All right, so on the next slide, so slang terms are shit, crystal, Tina, dope, crank. So we see it called a lot in this area dope or crystal. And the picture on the right is a lady, I believe it was about 12 or 15 years of methamphetamine use. That can definitely happen. I've seen it happen with our booking photos. So that's just the level of what it can do to the body. And then if someone doesn't refer to the drug, they'll refer to it as a weight. So trying to get a zip is an ounce, or they'll say trying to get a ball, which is an 8 ball, 3.5 grams. Mexi ball is 3 grams. So a lot of times it's done by the name or the weight rather than the drug itself. All right, we'll just jump to the next slide. So in quantities, 2.2 pounds is a kilogram. We see a lot of like pound type stuff or quarter pound and whatnot, but there's 453.6 grams in a pound. And the answer is down at the bottom on our question, but 28.3 grams in an ounce, 3.5 grams in an 8-ball. So an addict can use anywhere from a quarter gram to a gram for personal use. Now that's someone kind of on the higher end, but like on a daily basis. So if an addict uses a half a gram per day for personal use, how many uses are in a pound? It's 907 just for that. And that's not saying that someone isn't, using even less than that. So a pound of meth has a lot of uses and can go a long way to a lot of people. And from what we're seeing lately is it's not hard to get rid of a pound. So a pound of meth goes really, really quickly. So the uptick in usage is definitely there. Next slide, please. And if you have questions, Stacey, you can just jump in. All right, prices and quantities. So these are a little on the high end right at the moment. It's a little cheaper. So a pound of meth, 5,000 to 8,000. I know we've seen you can get a pound for around $2,000 to $4,000, kind of depending on who the source is. Once again, it's all supply and demand. It's who you know. It's how much you buy. An ounce or a zip is 800 to 2,000. I think normally we do controlled buys. When we're buying, our zips are anywhere between 600 and 800. An 8-ball, about $150 instead of 200 to 400. And a gram, roughly a packet of sugar, 75 to 150. Once again, that stays kind of consistent because if you're just buying a gram, you're going to kind of probably pay on the higher end, and same with half gram. All right, we'll just jump to the next slide. So these are just some photos of some of the stuff that's been seized during the investigation. So a lot of money can be seized with this, of course. So top left picture is, there's a shotgun down there, and then an extreme amount of cash. Picture on the top right is just a wide view of that same shot with different firearms, pistols, shotguns, cash, marijuana, drug paraphernalia, and then same thing on the bottom, just cash. So, and it's all on how people package it as well. So if you're curious or you see someone with a lot of cash, it usually be bundled up into $1,000 increments and then rubber banded together or things of that nature. So it's not typically how a normal person would carry money. Doesn't mean that they're a drug dealer. It just means that, there's could be a possible red flag with that. But we see a lot of cash seizure with the larger operations who are dealing a lot of drugs. Right, next slide. So methods used. So snorted, not super common. Some people do that with meth. You can either snort it or you can do what they call a hotline, which is you take a glass tube. It looks kind of like the pipe, and we'll have a picture of it here in a second. But you heat up the end of the tube, and then once that is super hot, you snort the methamphetamine through the tube. And what happens is it hits that hot pipe and kind of dissolves as it goes through into a vapor. So then when you inhale it, it's more of a vapor and it's not an actual crystallized product anymore. So it's a way to get a high a lot faster. Orally parachuting, which is something that used to be done a lot. It's not so much anymore. Swallowed whole, wrapped in toilet paper. Toilet paper kind of acts as a barrier as it gets moist and helps break down. And then, or put into pill caps. That's just one way of transporting it as well. They can pack it into pill caps, and then you can either open it that way or just take the whole pill itself. So those are just a few of the methods of use. Obviously, there's smoking, there's injecting. And on the next slide, we'll see the other aspect of it. So injected, syringes, spoons, Q-tips. So if you're going to inject something, you're going to put the product in a spoon with a little bit of water or something of that nature. You're going to heat it up to where that product kind of melts down. You put the cotton ball in there, or like a Q-tip end or something of that nature. You put your needle into that, and then you pull the product up through that. That helps to filter out any maybe larger chunks or any impurities that are sitting in there. So you get more of a cleaner product for a better high. Smoking it, glass tube or a glass pipe like that. Something you'll see common with a meth pipe like this is it's a glass tube with the bulb on the end, and there's a hole on the top. If you had a cocaine pipe like that, the hole wouldn't exist. It would actually just be a closed end. So meth pipes always have the hole on the top. You can drop the product down in there and it vents. But that is the same principle as you put the product down in there. You add a little moisture, you heat it up. As it starts to kind of boil and break down, creates smoke, and you inhale it. Those tubes you can actually buy on Amazon. They're super cheap. They're called incense burners, I believe. So they're not hard to get. You can buy a whole pack for like 20 bucks. So those pipes, those glass tubes, glass pipes are very, very, very easy to come by. All right, next slide. Like I said, you can jump in anytime if you have something. So this is going to be a kit or something you're going to find maybe in a house or like searching a car. So in the top left, a lot of syringes. You got the spoon. A syringe is also goes by the name of a rig. When people use syringes to get high or inject, they call it banging. So that is common. A lot of times people not seeing a lot of reused needles, which is good. But this is a case where that kit had a lot of rigs in it with the spoon and ready to go. And then same thing in the bottom right. I believe that's a diaper bag and it's at the bottom. Unfortunately, we do see a lot of that type of thing where it's concealed in something like that to obviously try to throw someone off. But there again, a lot of rigs or a lot of syringes in the bottom of that. And that's just that way it's readily available for the person who is needing a fix. Next slide.
Dan, I have a question here from one of our participants. Is there a needle exchange program here? And I think there's not, but because I think I just heard something on that, but I'm gonna address that, leave that to you.
Yeah, so I am not aware of any needle exchange program whatsoever. I do know that the prescription drop off is at the sheriff's office and I think a few other locations. So any old prescriptions you can drop off there. But needle exchange, not that I've seen anywhere yet in this area. We do see a lot of when we make contact with a user, a heavy user. There's a lot of receipts for syringe boxes, so diabetic syringe boxes. So and even in drug talk, when we look at cell phones or when we talk to individuals, it's the same thing as they always ask, do you have a clean? What they're talking about is a clean syringe or a clean rig. So I think that's a good sign. I mean, I don't obviously want anyone to use drugs, but it's nice and to see that people aren't trying to keep reusing or use someone else's stuff. So as far as an exchange program, unfortunately, no, I haven't seen one here yet. I don't know that anything is even in the works. But I do know from a lot of the drug talk and review and investigations, people are trying to find clean rigs so they aren't reusing others. On this picture, speaks for itself. 26-year-old mother of 6 from Rapid City. That would be a lot of marks where. So when someone injects into one spot over and over and over, you're going to have the vein is going to start collapsing. It's going to kind of build up not a calcium, but something similar. It's going to become hard. You're not going to be able to find that anymore. So they have to move around. So they'll move from one spot in the arm to the other spot to the other spot. And pretty soon if they try to keep going into that same spot, you get a lot of sores, and they'll get infected extremely bad. And there was an individual who was arrested a while ago, but the tops of his hands were completely gone, and you could see the bone through it because the injection site was used so often that it just started deteriorating all the skin and the muscle, and what was left was pretty much the top of his hands were open. So, but this is not uncommon for people who inject any kind of drug, is to move it around because the veins are collapsing. They'll go into the neck. Women can go into the breasts. They'll use like in between the toes, anywhere where there's a vein that hasn't been collapsed and is usable. Next slide, please. So this is just another photo of a method of use as far as smoking. The light bulb, not common anymore. First of all, a lot of those light bulbs don't exist anymore, especially in places. But you used to go into like motels and hotels, and a lot of the light bulbs were gone and taken out of the sockets, because you can take the silver piece off the end with the screw type. You can take the filament out and everything and screw that back down, and it creates basically just a pipe. And then the one on the bottom right is the same thing. It's a glass tube with a bulb on the end, which is pretty easy to buy just about anywhere as a means of getting your drug. All right, next slide, please. So meth mouth, this was an ad from a long time ago, but there's some back and forth talk about why meth mouth happens, and some people say that it's the nature of the chemicals in the drug that deteriorate the teeth and whatnot, and that could be partially true. I've talked to some medical professionals who attribute it to, more often than not, it's just hygiene. So when someone is high or has an extreme addiction, hygiene is not something that they're thinking about. So if you're using drugs a lot and whatnot, you're not going to be worried about your hygiene. You're probably going to shower a lot. You definitely are going to be brushing your teeth a lot. So yes, the chemical properties of the smoke probably have an effect, but hygiene is more of the number one effects of why this happens. Probably not having a great diet, and then not taking care of yourself either at that point. So, but this is common. I've seen this a lot in individuals who have used for a long time. It's not something that your casual user is probably going to end up with.
Dan, I don't want to interrupt you, but I've got a lot of people asking if you would be willing to share your PowerPoint with the group.
I would like to double check with my sergeant, make sure that's all right. Is that something that I can get back to you on by email after the presentation?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Yeah, I would love to be able to share. I just want to double check with him just to make sure, but I don't see why we couldn't.
Completely understand.
Okay. Yes, and I will definitely get your answer for you. Next slide, please. And then once again, we try to add a little humor every now and again, because it can be heavy on your heart. But if your crystal meth dealer has all their teeth, they're the cops. So don't trust those guys. Next slide, please. So this is another way of using, instead of smoking in a bulb, what you can do is use foil and a pen. So you take the innards out of the pen and you end up with a tube. How this is used is you put the product onto the foil with a little bit of moisture, and you heat it up the same with a lighter, butane torch, something of that nature. And once it becomes hot, it starts to boil and do the same thing as it would in a pipe. It starts to create smoke. As the smoke comes up, use the empty Bic tube pen and inhale it. So in essence, it's the same thing as a glass pipe. You're just using the foil instead and just catching the smoke as it comes off. This is really common. It's still very, very common. In heroin use, you'll see black marks on there, and that's because the product likes to run as it boils. But in meth, it just kind of stays in one place and it's easy to smoke. But those are things to look out for if anyone is wondering if someone that they know is using, or if someone asks them about that, is, do they have small foilers? A lot of them. Do they have any empty pen tubes? It'll have kind of a white filmy substance on the inside of it. Or if the foiler has a burn mark on it, those are pretty indicative of drug use of some type. So if anyone ever sees anything of that nature, it's definitely worth inquiring about and either contacting law enforcement or, however you need to address that, if it's someone that you know or whatnot. The picture on the right is just a baggie. Jeweler baggies are the common type of to move the product, especially when you're just gramming it out, or an 8-ball, something like that. So jeweler baggies are the normal product to move stuff. And on the next slide, if you would please, you'll see that meth paraphernalia. So you got the jeweler baggies. A lot of them have designs on them. You got the pipe, you got the straw. Straw can be the same thing as a big tube, and then you have the butane torch. Those work best if you're going to melt a product in the pipe or the tin foil, because it creates a lot of heat right away, rather than as a lighter, it's just a flame. On the right, you have a scale, digital scale. When people are buying their product, they don't like to be ripped off. So if they're buying an 8-ball, 3.5 grams, they don't want to get a Mexi ball. They're paying for an 8-ball. So a lot of individuals will bring their own scale, or they'll watch their dealer weigh it out, so that way they know what they're paying for. And then again, just an extreme amount of jeweler bags. Something of that nature, picture on the right, would be indicative of drug distribution. So if you've got digital scale, a bigger bag with the product, a lot of smaller jeweler bags, that means you're measuring it out, you're putting it into the baggies, and you're selling it. So that's a distributor or a dealer at that point. Next slide shows a pretty perfect example of what it's like to smoke it off of the foil. Once again, you heat it up, that smoke starts coming up, and then you smoke it up through whatever tube that you're going to use. And the next slide is pretty informative as far as your signs of use. Excuse me. I'll wait till you jump to the next slide for me. Thank you. So meth, increased physical activity. Once again, it is an upper. It's an amphetamine. Increased blood pressure and breathing rate, elevated body temperature, heavy sweating, loss of appetite, which is why in that one photo you saw the lady who looked fairly normal in the beginning, as opposed to years later with the sunken cheeks and things of that nature, is it's a weight loss. You don't feel like eating. You're elevated. You just want to do something. Definitely not sit down to eat. Patchy skin discoloration, sleeplessness, paranoia, or irritability. So if you see the picture of the eyeball, your uppers, your amphetamines, your things of that nature are going to make the pupil dilated. So it's going to be huge. So even in low light conditions where most people's pupil would be the opposite, it's dilated. So what happens is as we talked about earlier, you get on a bender, or you get meth use in maybe you're new to it, not used to it. But all of this happens: increased physical activity, increased blood pressure. And then what can happen is if you stay on that bender for too long, your body can start overheating and going into almost a survival type mode. So I think if people haven't, there's some videos out there on YouTube and stuff where someone is been on that, and they start sweating profusely. Usually they strip naked, down to no clothes, extremely elevated attitude, highly aggressive. More than likely, if law enforcement arrives on scene, I've seen it where tasers have zero effect, and the strength out of somebody who is high like that is phenomenal. It's like having a massive dump of an adrenaline, but it's consistent. It doesn't just hit and then go away like a normal person. It's constant, but with that constant elevated heart rate, blood pressure, adrenaline, that's when your heart can only take so much. And then people, have died from exposure or from meth usage due to that, because your body can only take so much. At that elevated state, your heart is technically only a muscle. So it'd be like doing curls, nonstop for 3 or 4 days. At some point, your arms are just going to give out. You're not going to be able to, and your heart's no different. So there are cases where meth has definitely caused fatalities due to that overusage, and then the body just going to an elevated state, and it just has no way to come back down. All right, and the last slide is questions on meth. I know we've already been discussing a lot, but any other questions that I can answer for you?
This has been fantastic, Dan. I really learned a lot today, and I hope our participants did too.
Yes, it's unfortunately in our area, in the whole Rapid City and surrounding area, we have agents who work down on Pine Ridge Reservation as well, and around that area. It's very prevalent, and it's unfortunately it's become easier to get, and we're seeing the addiction level rise, which I think it's just because of the ease of use, socioeconomic situations, and it just is it's a plague on our society. So we're definitely fighting it as hard as we can. It just is because it's becoming so common, and so it's almost like marijuana was back in the day, that it's so easy to get. It's definitely a hard fought battle. But yeah, if you have any other questions, Stacy, moving forward or anything of that nature.
Actually, we have some here in our chat. One of them is from, what can we as a community do to help fight against meth?
That's a great question. So some of the things that are good to do is just seeing the paraphernalia and things of that nature that we went over in the pictures. So if you're seeing foilers, big tube pens, baggies, things of that nature, report those. We actually get a lot of tips. A lot of the tips that Kate was talking about, the 411 tip line, or just calling law enforcement, they kind of filter those out, and either they stay at a patrol level, where they can actually go out and try to investigate that, or watch a certain location if they think that there's drug use or distribution. But it also comes to us as well, because it might be tied to a case that we're currently working. It might be a name of an individual that we know. So those tips can be big, especially if it's something like Kate was saying. We may not have all of the information yet to really go forward with a search warrant or things of that nature. So we kind of have to just hang on to it. But when those tips come in and we hear from other individuals who are seeing this or think that there's something going on, that just helps us to corroborate what we already know and can help us to proceed with that investigation. So just reporting something is a big step in the right direction. Also, if people don't want to report it, if it's someone that they know, a family member, something of that nature, is just being aware of the signs of kind of what we went over about usage, maybe how they're acting, what's going on, or if they've seen the paraphernalia of that person, and then just trying to get them some help. It would never hurt my feelings if I never deal with that individual, and even though they were an addict, and they go get some help and end up being a fantastic person and never having to touch meth again. I think that ultimately would be the best goal. So, but as a society, as a community, reporting it is the number one thing. We just get a lot of tips, and we do the best we can, but that is the ultimate goal, and the ultimate way you can help, because we may already know what's going on. We just need that extra bit of information. And if someone never says anything, then we just have to wait.
Great. That kind of leads me to, how is meth safely disposed of?
So when we take meth off the streets, no matter what we find, it's placed into our evidence section at the Rapid City Police Department. That's a secure facility.
And then once the case is done and prosecuted, and whether that individual was sentenced or not, all of the drugs that are seized throughout a certain time frame, once they're available to be thrown out of that case, they're all sent to a area. And basically used in an incinerator and burned down to nothing. So nothing ever goes back out into the system. Nothing gets like flushed down the toilet. It's all incinerated.
So like, and this kind of leads into the next one. Like, how would people protect themselves? Like, if they went into a home where somebody's been smoking meth, or, you know, like say there's, you see your roommate or your kid or your spouse, and you know that they've been smoking, you're not ready to call the police on them yet, but you want to dispose of that. Like, what would you encourage a person to do to protect themselves and to get rid of that?
Sure. And that's a great question, because yeah, someone may not be ready to call law enforcement on, you know, the person that they love. So, you know, really the safest way at that point, you could just dispose of it in your trash can, making sure that the individual can't get it again. Really, other than that, there's not a lot. You can, you know, go find a dumpster or something like that nature. You just, the deal is, you want to make sure is the reason it's encouraged to report it is you never want someone to think that it was yours and, you know, is located, like it falls out of your trash bin when the trash guy lifts it up and dumps it and then gets tied back to you somehow. But if you're not ready for that stage yet, you can just throw it away. You can just throw it away. If it's a syringe or a needle or you know, something that is that can poke you, put it in like a Pepsi bottle or a Gatorade bottle or something that protects it. So that way, when you throw it away, if anyone were to go through there, you know, even at the landfill, I know sometimes they go through trash to separate it. That way, there's no exposure to that person. They may get stuck. So those are some things you can do as far as syringes. Put it into a sharps container of some sort. And the other one, I mean, really, you can just throw it away and then find a safe time to address that individual. So if they're at an elevated state and they're high, it's probably not the time to do it. But yeah, I encourage people to help their loved ones to get through it, especially if it doesn't need to involve us.
You know that there's actually a couple more questions here, but I think about, you know, whenever I go to the reservation and we see these houses that are boarded up, and of course, housing is such a huge issue, not only in Rapid City, but especially on the reservation. We've got, you know, sometimes 4, 5, 6, even up to 10 families living in a single family dwelling. And so we see these houses that are boarded up that usually, not usually, but, you know, oftentimes that's an indication that meth has been used in that house, and they have to go in and detoxify it or whatever. So I guess maybe when we were talking about disposal, you know, that's kind of where that came from. Brandon asks here, is more being done to help children who are being exposed to meth and the living conditions and behaviors that go along with it?
Yes. So I know it's a common theme amongst everything. DSS is, they have numerous cases. But yes, when drugs are involved and when we get involved and there's children, we take a lot of steps to we don't just release them with somebody in hopes that works out. I mean, we take a lot of steps to make sure DSS is involved, the case is there. That way they're not put and forced just right back into that environment again. That steps need to be taken by the parent or whoever is the guardian of these children, that if they were to get them back, hopefully they've gone through their treatment, or you know, something has happened to where these kids are not just forced back into a bad situation. Because I think maybe years ago that probably did happen. But now it's much more strict. The laws are more strict on that. And so I'd like to think that, yes, we do we do our part on the front end to get the kids out of that environment. I know DSS then takes over at that point. And then I can't say for certain because I don't follow through every case as far as what DSS has done. But I know that they have protocols in place that they do not release the children back to that guardian until they've proven that they finished a treatment program, or the other protocols or stipulations that they have in place. So yes, there's a lot more is being done to try to keep these kids safe and out of that harm's way. And so they don't just see it as an okay thing to do and grow up and end up being the next addict. Also, I know as far as babies who are born with meth in their system, unfortunately right now, there is no charge that can be given to the mother. So that, and it's not so much an unfortunate deal, but it kind of is, because then that baby ends up having to go through a lot of withdrawals and a lot of heartache for no resolve whatsoever. So as far as meth-borne infancy, we get those cases all the time, not so much UNET, but I know our investigations division, as soon as the hospital is aware that that baby has meth in their system, they are called and investigation starts on that. So immediately law enforcement and DSS are involved on that newborn. And that is pretty much the way it goes as well with other children when we are involved in a drug case and we find that kids are living in that home.
Okay. I think one of our last ones is, can you turn drugs into law enforcement without any questions?
Yes and no. So what I mean by that is, if you want to just turn drugs in and say, let me say this, if you found drugs somewhere or they were in your house, they're not yours and you're not a user, and you say, hey, like, these are in my house, I don't know where they came from, you're probably going to get some questions like who was there and things of that nature. On our end, we would do that to just try to find out and see if that's an individual we could talk to and maybe find out who they're getting from. So we can try to work up that ladder. We're not there to jam people up on that sort of thing. I'm not going to charge anyone with that, especially if it is theirs, because they're trying to do the right thing. And why would you get disciplined for trying to do the right thing and then ever think that you would come back and do it again? So we're advocates for that. Question free, it's going to be a little tough, but if you're there's also called an amnesty box, and I believe that is over at the CARE campus. It used to be at the old Detox, but now at the CARE campus on Kansas City Street. You can put in whatever you want in there and there's no questions asked. So if you've got syringes, meth, heroin, I mean, if it's whether it's yours or not yours, and you just want to get rid of it, no questions asked. You can take it to the CARE campus. There's a green box. It's an amnesty box. And you can put it in there, shut the lid, kind of like a postal deal. It goes down to the bottom, and every couple of months, an officer goes over there and empties it. But we don't know who it comes from. There's nothing attached to it. We basically put it in evidence to be incinerated. So that is another way that you can do that.
That's really nice to know. I didn't even know anything like that existed.
Yes. Yep.
Well, I want to thank you today for your time, Detective Rose. I think we got to thank you for your presentation. It was very informative, and I agree with that. It definitely was. I know I certainly learned a lot, and we look forward. I know you're going to do a few other sessions for us, and we look forward to that. And I look forward to hearing from you also about your presentation slides. We certainly understand if that is your intellectual property, and they may not be able to be shared, but we hope that we can. So
Yes.
thank you so much. I want to encourage everybody. I posted my email in the chat box. I also posted a link to our survey. If you could please, please, please take that survey. We would certainly appreciate it. And thank you so much again to you and Cade. I'm not even going to try to say his last name because I know I'm going to mess it up.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great day.
You too.